Well lads, hope we're doing well and welcome to another Q&A episode. First question today is, I always train in the evening and struggle to eat afterwards. Should I just have a protein shake and go to bed, or should I sacrifice sleep in order to get a big meal in? And this is a common issue, particularly with a lot of the team sport athletes, the GAA athletes in particular that I work with, where a lot of the midweek training sessions is done in the evening, and afterwards you can either find yourself a little bit short on time and therefore not knowing whether you should put that time into preparing and eating a big meal, or whether that time would be better spent going to bed that bit earlier and getting the benefits of increasing the amount of time you're getting to sleep. But on the other hand, you have this other issue where you may not have as big an appetite as you would at other times of the day, because most people find that after training their appetite is not as high as other times. So that leaves you knowing the benefits that you want to get from post-training nutrition, but not feeling like you have the time and or the appetite to get a big meal in. But if we look at the key fundamentals of post-training nutrition, that might give us a better idea of how we can go about getting the benefits, but without these downsides. The components of optimal post-training nutrition can be summarized as 3 R's, those being rebuild, refuel and rehydrate. The rebuild portion that refers to the protein intake from that meal, and the rebuild specifically refers to the idea that when we train, we are breaking down the muscles in some way, we experience muscle damage, and we are also putting a stimulus on the muscle that means it has an opportunity to increase the muscle protein synthesis. For both those reasons, we want to be providing some protein within that post-training period in order to facilitate that recovery and that muscle protein synthesis, or else the body will go to other areas of the body and try and break down some protein from those areas in order to get those amino acids to facilitate the recovery and building of the tissues that have been under the most stress within that training session. The second aspect is the refueling aspect, where specifically here we're mainly talking about carbohydrates, which will have been predominantly the source of fuel used within a high intensity training session, and therefore there will be decreased. The levels of glycogen, the level of carbohydrates stored within the body will have been decreased as a result of that intense training session, and therefore we usually want to use the post-training period as a way of starting that process of refueling for those next sessions. This becomes even more important if your next session is within a short period after that session, whether that is the next morning or even the next evening, and becomes slightly less important if it's a couple of days before the next session, where you have a longer opportunity to get more carbohydrates in between those sessions. But even in that case, it's still probably good practice to consume carbohydrates after a training session in order to start that refueling process and to take advantage of a potential increase in insulin sensitivity. That means the carbohydrates consumed in that post-training period will be more likely to be stored more quickly and more readily as glycogen. The third element then is quite similar in a way, that it is that rehydrating, where we're replacing, rather than the carbohydrates used, we're replacing the fluids used within that session. And again, this is important because we want to be fully rehydrated by the time the next session comes around, but it's also important because the more adequately hydrated we are in that recovery period, the better the recovery is likely to be. Or maybe put a different way, if we are dehydrated and remain dehydrated for the post-training period, it's going to increase the viscosity of the blood or make the blood thicker, and therefore make it a bit more difficult to get the nutrients required for recovery to the working muscles, and to assist in the removal of waste products from the muscles as well. So when we take all that into account, we know we need some protein, we know we need some carbohydrates, and we know we need some fluids within that post-training period in order to get the benefits of that. Now, of course, we can get that from a full meal, and that's an absolutely perfect way to do so. But again, if you find yourself in that position where you are time constrained and you don't have a big appetite, there are likely better options that can do the job without sacrificing those downsides. This might mean something like a protein shake and a few pieces of fruit. It might be a protein smoothie. It might be something like chocolate milk. It could be Greek yogurt and granola, or it even could be something like a bowl of sugary cereal and protein milk, for example. And all of those would be good options that can be quickly thrown together and can be easily eaten, even in a case where you don't have that big feeling of appetite, but will still get the job done as it relates to your post-training nutrition and the benefits you want to get from that. Second question is, I've been losing weight well for a few months, but have plateaued, probably because I've been half-assing things a bit, to be honest. Is there anything I can do to get that motivation back? And again, this is a very common issue where you go through a phase of really focused intense fat loss, but after a while you find that it's not happening as quickly as it once did. And this can happen for a number of reasons. It might be that your metabolic rate adapts and decreases because of that lower energy intake, either by decreasing your metabolic rate or by subconsciously down regulating your unconscious movement, or simply because you're not carrying as heavy of a body weight, less energy is required to carry that body weight about. But given the way the question was asked, I would say that it's more likely that you're simply not adhering to the same behaviors as you did when you were making progress. So you have a couple of options here, and one of them would be to have that honest conversation with yourself and ask yourself if you feel able and willing to get back to those behaviors that once led to progress for you. If you are, then I recommend doing so and reaping the rewards of that again. But if you can be honest with yourself and actually say that you are not feeling able or willing to get back to those behaviors, then I think it's important to take a back step and not have that attitude of being half in and half out. Because if you're in that position, what you're doing is getting the downsides that come with a period of fat loss, that being an increased focus on food, more use of willpower around your food decisions, and less focus on ongoing fueling, recovery, and overall health. But you're not getting the upsides of that fat loss, that being the progress that you want to be seeing. Whereas what I would recommend is that if you're feeling unable to get back to the behaviors that you know work for you for fat loss, then I would recommend bringing your intake and your focus back up to more of a maintenance focus, where you can then reap the rewards of increased fueling, better recovery, increased ability to focus on health, decreased hunger levels, and also start to bank up some motivation to go back into that fat loss period if you need to again down the line. So in summary, have that honest conversation with yourself and ask yourself, am I able to get back to the behaviors that I know led to progress before? And if so, do so. And if I'm not, then I would recommend keeping that focus or taking that focus back towards more of a maintenance level to get the benefits of doing so, knowing that when the time comes, you'll be in a much better position down the line to go back into a more focused fat loss phase when you decide to do so. Third question is, do you recommend beetroot shots? For context, I do some running, 10k/half marathons, and I play a bit of GAA during the summer. Beetroot shots can definitely be beneficial for endurance performance, particularly for the types of activities you're doing, like the 10k runs, half marathons, and even GAA. And the main active compound that affects this within beetroot is dietary nitrate, which gets converted into what's called nitric oxide in the body. And this nitric oxide can improve your blood flow and your oxygen delivery to the working muscles, and that is what can potentially enhance performance. And as you can imagine, if you are more efficient in your use of oxygen, then you have to consume less oxygen in order to do the same level of exercise, therefore decreasing what's known as the oxygen cost of exercise. And the increased blood flow will also mean that the nutrients that you're looking to get to the working muscles, such as the carbohydrates, the glucose, and other elements such as amino acids, are going to get to the muscles that little bit quicker and more efficiently, and will also mean that the waste products that can build up as a result of intense exercise, things like lactate, will also have the opportunity to move more freely away from the muscle and get recycled and used as energy. So it's usually most beneficial in those type of activities where those things become the limiting factor. This is usually slightly higher intensity work, so for things like your 10k and potentially even half marathon, there is some potential benefit that could be had there, and especially then for the likes of GAA, where it's more intermittent, high intensity type work, it could be very beneficial as well. And it's certainly something that I recommend to generally more advanced athletes rather than someone who's at the beginning of their nutrition journey, because the effect size there tends to be relatively small. We're talking 1 to 3% of improvement. So it's not this thing that's going to make a huge massive difference to your nutrition in the way that, say, certain elements of getting your fueling right or getting your overall nutrition on an ongoing basis can be transformative over the space of weeks and months. whereas this is a relatively small improvement, which is why I recommend it be something that you consider down the line rather than something that you put in with the beginning of your nutritional changes. In terms of how you would actually go about using them, you can do a nitrate load, which involves days of consuming beetroot or other dietary nitrates in order to build up an amount of those within the body. But typically you'll get the most benefit or the bulk of the benefits from consuming something like a beetroot shot in sufficient dosages within the hours leading up to the performance event, so a match, for example, or a race. And this will typically be in the form of a concentrated shot, but you could just as easily get it from regular beetroot juice that you can get in the shop. Now, this isn't the vinegar that you get as part of a jar of beetroots. This is a specific juice that you'll find in most health food shops or even online, and the concentrated shots make it that little bit easier because this stuff doesn't taste particularly nice, so you can just down it in one shot. Or you can benefit from some aspect of dietary nitrates, or benefit from them to some extent by including plenty of leafy greens or eating plenty of beetroots within meals, and also just consuming a wide range of fruit and veg in general. But to supercharge that a little bit, or to ensure that you're getting adequate amounts to lead the performance benefits, the beetroot shots can be a good way to go. Thanks for listening. If you'd like more free resources or info about my performance nutrition coaching program, hit the link in the podcast description.